Hey guys, welcome to the channel and happy weekend to all of you. So today I'm going to be doing a 1960s lake house. We're going to be starting off the 1960s with I didn't really think that it was a vacation home, but maybe this family is pretty well off. They have their own lakefront property. That's kind of what I was thinking for this home. And as far as the 1960s go and the style of homes and even commercial buildings, they were very much like the 50s. Mid-century kind of flew in from the late 40s all the way up until the 70s, so there's not really a whole lot of new styles that people gravitated towards. So mid-century modern or like a minimal traditional was the most popular for several decades. So that's kind of what I'm going to be focusing on in the 60s, just some more mid-century builds. I'm sure you guys don't mind. I certainly don't. But yeah, so I decided to do a lake house because I actually saw a picture of a home that had a lake behind it with like this beautiful 60s housewife on a boat enjoying life. So I thought that was kind of a really good start to the 60s as far as, the series goes. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I certainly enjoyed it. I actually changed a little bit of the build only because I wasn't exactly happy with the exterior. But it doesn't change all that much. I really just changed some bits and bobs and the roof, which for some reason made it like 10 times better for me. I don't know why. But if you guys don't know or aren't familiar with what was popular in the 60s, it was a lot of brown, a lot of green, a lot of orange and blue. So a lot of like primary colors, but that were more muted and kind of muddy, but also bright. So it was kind of an interesting mix. It was very much like the 50s, except saturated. But as I usually do, I always provide you guys with some reference pictures that I used to build this build. So on the left you can see that the bathroom is completely blue, and in all the pictures that I looked at for 1960s bathrooms, yes, blue toilets were popular. And on the left was also a pretty big inspiration for the living room, especially downstairs. And I took some inspiration from the right for the upstairs, which is kind of weird in a way because the upstairs has the kitchen and the dining room, so it's not downstairs like it normally would be. And this is because with this type of house, especially in the 60s, split level houses were very, very popular. And unfortunately in The Sims, I cannot do that as I would want. We would need terrain tools for that. So basically the bottom floor of the house, like you would enter the second floor, that would actually be the front door. And then you would go down the stairs and that would be the second floor, but it would technically be the first floor, just be underground kind of. And I can't really properly do that in The Sims, not yet anyway, so I had to improvise, but I wanted it to be as accurate as possible, so that's why I have the kitchen upstairs and some bedrooms and living areas downstairs. So that's why that is. So as far as the 60s goes, the 60s was characterized mostly by music, external and internal conflicts, especially in the US, and of course casual drug use. And the conflicts affected every area of life, even through the economical growth. Even though that was doing well and the middle class thrived, ethnic Americans and also women fought for their freedoms and rights during this time, especially. Their protesting and mass organization allowed for many of the rights we have today. So we have our grandparents to thank for fighting for our rights. Also during this time, the Cuban Missile Crisis began in 1962, which was a near military confrontation between the US and the Soviet Union about the presence of Soviet missiles in Cuba. After an American naval blockade of Cuba, the Soviet Union pretty much said, hey, we'll come out of Cuba if you'll take your missiles out of Turkey. And that's kind of what happened, but it was a very tense time in American politics and like safety. A lot of people were very worried about the imminent nuclear holocaust that was rumored to happen just because of the missile crisis. Yeah, so that was a major concern for a lot of people, and the Cultural Revolution was officially sparked by Kennedy's assassination in 1963, and it lasted until the early 70s. In 1955 is when the Vietnam War began officially, but in 1961 and 1962, that's when American forces first arrived in Vietnam, and it didn't end till 1975. The Vietnam War was also a very big deal during this time. It pretty much dominated every news outlet, and it was very much a heated debate as to if we were even supposed to be there, if it was even a good venture for the US, because up until this point, after World War II, we kind of took it upon ourselves as being the communist police. And but that didn't end up very well for the US. So as I said before, Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, and that absolutely rocked America to its core. Like, many people were there and who were watching TV, they were absolutely devastated and shocked by the president's passing. And for the next decade, and even today, people still theorize as to who or why the gunman who assassinated him actually was and what was his actual motive. So that's still kind of a debated thing even today. In the late 50s and early 60s, segregation was still a huge issue for African American rights. Peaceful protests led by Martin Luther King Jr. paved the way for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was signed by Lyndon B. Johnson, and that act actually outlawed racial segregation in schools, public spaces, and employment. Unfortunately, even though it was illegal to segregate, many Americans disagreed with the law and continued to try and minimize minority freedoms, especially in southern states. So the civil rights movement actually lasted well into the 70s, and it was a constant struggle for African Americans every day. Even though the law was passed, there was still a lot of prejudice and hatred in people's hearts. And honestly, I remember watching a documentary on the 60s and the civil rights movement, and it struck me how similar, like, even though all the freedoms that we have today are in place, there's still a lot of there's still a lot of work to be done. Also, it wasn't just minorities that were fighting for more rights and even to protect the rights that they already had. Women were also fighting against the norms and the prejudice of men, that women were unintelligent, that women couldn't be anywhere else but the home. And at the time, well, this was because at the time a woman's place was generally seen as being in the home, and they were excluded from many jobs and professions because of this prejudice. In commercials, often portrayed a woman as being helpless if her car broke down and things like that. And in the US, a presidential commission on the status of women found discrimination against women in the workplace and every other aspect of life. Kind of like a wake-up call or a revelation, which essentially launched 2 decades of prominent women-centered legal reforms. Feminists took to the streets marching and protesting, writing books, debating to change social and political views that limited women. And in 1963, with Betty Friedan's revolutionary book, The Feminine Mystique, the role of women in society and in public and private life was questioned. And this also led to more neutral color palette for girls and boys, which was used in decor and in fashion. So more neutral colors, more yellows, greens, blues. They were no longer gender specific, and pink was also seen as a gender neutral color at this time as well. And another big win for women was in 1960 when the FDA approved female contraceptives, and that was released during this time. In the Griswold versus Connecticut, the Supreme Court ruled that married couples may use contraceptives. And this case actually stemmed from the action of Estelle Griswold, who was the executive of Planned Parenthood, who opened a birth control clinic in 1961. And by 1965, 1 out of every 4 married women in the U.S. under the age of 45 had begun using it. So it was a major boost to women's choice and women's health care, and this was a really big change for women, and they could now choose when they wanted to have kids rather than just, wait and see or have unplanned pregnancies that they couldn't afford or be able to take care of. So it was a really big win for women during this time. And as far as technology goes, the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union pretty much dominated the 60s, and it also dominated pop culture, movies, TV shows, science fiction, novels, everything. It kind of sparked a revolution almost as far as pop culture goes, and people just became obsessed with space and science fiction and rockets and astronauts. Astronauts were kind of like heroes in Americans' eyes during this time. And the Soviets sent the first man, Yuri Gagarin, into outer space during the Vostok 1 mission on April 12, 1961, and scored a host of other successes, but the middle of the decade, the U.S. was taking the lead, and in May 1961, President Kennedy set for the U.S. the goal of a manned spacecraft that would land on the moon by the end of the decade. And as the 1960s began, part of the 60s, at least for me, I think of the music of the 60s, and a lot of the 60s is kind of marked by music and musicians who were very influential during this time. It wasn't just, the main ones like the Beatles, but it was also the folk singers like Bob Dylan who pretty much defined the era because of the Vietnam War and everything that was going on outside the US as well as internally. It was kind of a way to speak out against the things that people disagreed with through music. So that's why a lot of the music from the 60s and 70s are very politically charged and culturally charged, and they have connotations that usually people have that are against these things that the government is doing. So if you really listen to 60s music and the lyrics, I'm sure you'll notice it more now that I've mentioned it, because I certainly did when I watched the documentary on the 60s, which you guys should definitely watch if you love history. I believe it's on Netflix. But it's this whole series that takes you through each decade and just the history of the decades and what was going on during the time. And it was awesome. I highly recommend it. If I find it, or if I remember the name, I'll link that down below for you guys to check out. But yeah, so as the 60s began, the major rock and roll stars of the 50s, such as Chuck Berry and Little Richard, kind of dropped off the charts, and popular music in the US came to be dominated by Motown and Motown girl groups and novelty pop songs. Another important change in music during the 60s was the American folk music revival, such as Bob Dylan and many other ones, but I just really like Bob Dylan, so that's why I was mentioning him quite a few times. Also during the 60s, surf rock emerged, and a genre that was centered in Southern California and based on beach and surfing. In addition to the usual songs about, teenage romance and, love and all of that, the Beach Boys quickly became the premier surf rock band and almost completely overshadowed anyone else who tried to enter the genre. And the Beach Boys quickly became the biggest surf genre rock band, and they reached their peak in 1963 through about 1965, then gradually gave way to bands that were influenced more by counterculture and the counterculture movement of the 60s. And in England, the Beatles had played kind of more of a blue-collar hard rock, but their manager, Brian Epstein, kind of cleaned them up a bit, marketed them to the US and to teenage girls, thus starting Beatlemania, and it pretty much exploded. And after the group's appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1964, they were household names, and every girl was in love with them. But yeah, so that's kind of a little bit about the history and culture of the early 60s. Next week, when I do the late 60s, I'll talk more about the culture and the movements of the late 60s, early 70s. And yeah, I'm pretty excited though. I mean, we're halfway through the series and it's just been amazing. I absolutely love doing these. I love building the builds and gathering the research and sharing it with you guys. I hope that you all have been enjoying it too. I've gotten a lot of lovely comments from all of you about the series, just, how much you're enjoying it and how much you love learning about the history that I babble on about constantly, which honestly is kind of surprising to me because I started doing this series because I felt like there wasn't a lot of complimentary builds that people had for the Decade Challenge, which I really enjoy watching. So that's why I kind of started this build series, because I just felt like, I'm a bit stronger in building, I think, than I am Let's Plays. So yeah, I thought that I might enjoy this a little better than doing the decade challenge, so I was right. And who knows, maybe I'll pick up the decade challenge as well, but not for a while, I don't think. I have some really cool things planned for the future, especially in June, so yeah, I'm pretty excited for that. So here at this point, I'm starting to do the inside of the build, and I didn't think that the fireplace would work, but it actually does. And the fireplace, what had happened was I had it set on the floor, right? But then I took away some of the foundation and the fireplace was still kind of floating there. So I was like, oh, this actually looks really cool. And it's very accurate to the fireplaces that you would have seen in the 60s. And granted, I would have rather have one of those like freestanding cone looking fireplaces that like just kind of attached to the ceiling. But this was a good happy medium for me. So I tested it out and it actually works. I was so surprised. The only thing that is kind of weird is when your sim goes to light the fireplace, they still do the animation as if the fireplace was on the ground, but the actual fireplace will light up where it is. So there's not really a problem with that, really. And it doesn't light anything on fire, which is great. Of course, we have to have a TV in the living room. That was a household item at this point. Everyone could pretty much afford a television. Not everyone could afford a color television, though. Color was just starting out at this time, and most people just had black and white TVs. But color television was definitely the new thing, and it was pretty exciting because, I mean, you could see movies or TV as you would actually see them. And I was also really excited because I got the chance to get Outdoor Retreat today, and I was so excited because a lot of the items in Outdoor Retreat actually worked really well for this build, since it's kind of more like a outdoorsy build by the lake. So I was really excited to use some of these items. I think they worked really well. So unfortunately, I think one of my recordings got corrupted somehow, so I don't believe that you'll be able to see how I did the master bedroom as well as the teen girls bedroom, but I'll definitely show you guys in the machinima at the end so you can get to see it better. I mean, you'll be able to see it a little bit as I'm moving around, but I really like how it turned out. I think it's really cute and historically accurate, especially the bathrooms. I paid special attention to those. So this bedroom is supposed to be the grandmother's bedroom, and I imagine that the grandmother lives with the family and she's a little more old school, so I try to include some more like old-fashioned looking items into her room so that it kind of looked like she still had some of the items that she had when she was younger, but they just kind of, stuck around, mixed with newer looking items. But I really like how it turned out. I used one of the accent tables as a headboard, and then I used some of the plants to kind of hide the bed knobs so that it would look like it was supposed to be part of the bed. Here I am putting that accent table on the bed. I thought it looked kind of cool, and I did have to use move objects a lot in this build, so if you do download this, make sure you have move objects on before you place the lot, so that way everything is in place and everything looks just as it was, because, nothing is more frustrating than having to replace items or things disappearing on you. So yeah, just a friendly reminder for you guys, because I know that it's happened to me way too many times, and I know how frustrated that I get when that happens. I noticed that a lot of beds had like a tabletop or like a built-in dresser kind of behind the bed, so that's kind of the idea that I had for that bed. So from what I can tell, nearly all bathrooms in the 60s had blue tile and matching blue toilets and sinks. Like, I don't know if that was just what I was finding or if that was actually the case, but I saw a lot of that. So I think nearly every bathroom in the house has blue and white tile somehow. Especially the upstairs bathroom, I think. Yeah, it was the bathroom for the grandmother. This bathroom was the downstairs bathroom. I think the daughter would use this one, or it would be like a guest bathroom. But yeah, the upstairs bathroom that the grandmother would use, that was so blue. I just couldn't believe that people actually liked to have matching blue toilets and sinks. That just blew me away. Ha! But yeah, so the teenager's bedroom, the teen boys, is the room next to the grandmother's, which I like a lot too. I think he has his own like ensuite, which is kind of cool, but his bathroom is more like browns and tan, which was also very popular during this time. So much brown everywhere and green carpet. So that's what I was portraying in this house. I have a lot of green carpet going on. Another thing that was popular during this time was using a lot of stone mixed with wood. The whole idea of mid-century was kind of to go back in a way to kind of reminisce about the craftsman style, going back to nature, and a lot of the wall treatments were either stone or wood paneling. So it gave a lot of warmth to a house, and in a lot of older houses from this era, you can still see that in the architecture. So I felt like the teen girls' room didn't have enough music, pictures, and posters on the wall. I thought the flowers were cute, but it still wasn't enough, and these picture frames reminded me of the Beatles, so maybe she has like framed pictures of the Beatles and Elvis. And even though Elvis wasn't as popular now as he was in the 50s, only because he actually went to war and he served for a few years, and when he came back, he wasn't as popular as he used to be. I mean, he's always been really popular. He's always had a huge fan base, but not like before he went to the war, in my opinion anyway. I really loved this like geometric carpet with the reds and the oranges in the teen boys room, and I think that worked really, really well. So I wanted to kind of do a more neutral color palette for the boy, and yeah, I really like how his room turned out. And one thing I want to mention though is when I was testing out the house, I noticed that he wasn't able to go to sleep, which I know sounds weird, but he would get into bed and then he would just kind of get in bed for a second and then get out of bed, and it was really weird. There's nothing really in the way that I know of, so I don't know if that's just my game being glitchy or if it's the way that I placed it. I'm not really sure because there's not really anything in the way. So if you do download this, you may have to change where the bed is if that's happening to you. I'm not sure if it's the bed or if it's something else, but I just wanted to let you know. And I thought it'd be really cute to have these like buffets kind of in front of this media console with some records and so maybe him and a few friends could listen to music. And yeah, I thought that was kind of a cute little area of his room because music was a very, very big deal during the 60s. But I believe we're almost done. I'm just going to be doing his bathroom, and then I think I did some like little extra details here and there off camera. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys learned something new, and I will see you guys next week for next week's 1960s build, which I'm pretty excited about because it's gonna be a trailer. And I'm so excited because I haven't done a trailer before in The Sims, so we'll see how that works. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye guys.